Welcome to Radio 64.
By the bass, the bass, the bass.
welcome to Radio 64 Video Game Music Remix Radio. I'm your host, Eric Mickles, also known online as duskvstweak. Radio 64 is part of the Radio Meanwhile network. Visit radiomeanwhile.com for more information about this and other great podcasts. You can share your thoughts on this episode and request music by following the show on Facebook or Twitter at Radio64Pod. Please rate, subscribe, and share the show on Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. This is our Final Fantasy VI special, a whole episode of Final Fantasy VI remixes, which I suppose it could be argued this entire series, this entire podcast has been a Final Fantasy VI special in some ways, but this one is very focused on FF6. Some of my favorite remixes and tracks from Final Fantasy VI represented today. We open the show with Terra. How else do you open a Final Fantasy VI show? I guess with the prelude. I shouldn't have asked that question. I answered it, and now I'm a little upset with myself with my choices. But we chose Terra's theme because this is Final Fantasy VI, the Terra theme. And the first time I heard it play, the first time I popped on the Super Nintendo and I heard that Terra theme being played, I was like, what is this? The best music I had heard in video games had come from things like Donkey Kong Country, which changed how I viewed music in video games in general. And then I played Final Fantasy VI, and there was no going back. It shaped how I view video game music completely, and how much of it I listen to outside of video games. That Terra remix by Jovette Rivera is just so much fun. Just a whole bunch of energy, a whole lot of different influences in there. You have some Koto and Teoko drums in there playing with that guitar, which when it comes in, it just tears up the place. This is just such a energetic, epic masterpiece of a song. And yeah, you know what? We're doing Final Fantasy VI. I'm probably going to speak in hyperbole today. A lot. I'm going to be throwing around epic, masterpiece, and perfect a bit, and I can't apologize for that. I mean, I don't even know what you categorize this as. Rock and guitar piece, it's a techno dance piece, it's orchestral Koto piece. This track is not content to stick to one genre. Now, this track, and many of the tracks we're going to play today, come from the album Final Fantasy VI Balance in Ruin. It is my favorite album from Overclocked Remix. The artwork is beautiful in the cases, and this album is able to create a soundscape that remains consistent from beginning to end. No song feels like it doesn't belong with the rest of the songs. Even though they're all doing different things and different styles, there's just such a synergy and unity between all these songs and the soundtrack. It's an amazing album. If you haven't listened to it, check out Balance in Ruin. So again, that track was The Sixth Kingdom by Jovette Rivera from ocrx.org from the game Final Fantasy VI. This is remixing the battle theme, which was the first battle theme I ever listened to in a Final Fantasy game, and kind of set the standard for me. It had that dark wavy sound in the background, but it also was like this trumpet piece. The battle theme was like a solo trumpet while you're going through your fight. Noir has come in and just made it a complete solo piece, a solo piano piece. And it's great. It still has all that energy, but it's a bit more classical here. It feels right at home as a piano-only track. Maybe you could still bring in that trumpet, but I feel like when you hear this, you're like, oh, of course, this song should have always been a piano rendition. So this is Battle Theme, Ivory Metal Mix by Noir from ocrx.org from the game Final Fantasy VI. That was Battle Theme, Ivory Metal Mix by Noir from ocremix.org from the game Final Fantasy VI. That dun 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 classic. Anytime I hear that, I'm like, oh, it's on. The first time I got into a battle in Final Fantasy VI, I was terrified. I didn't know what was happening. I had never played a JRPG like that before. One of the cooler tracks that you encounter early on is the Mount Colts theme. I mean, there's a lot of cool tracks. I should hold back what I'm saying there, but a cool track that you encounter in Final Fantasy VI is the Mount Colts theme. XPRTNovice has turned this track into kind of a folksy acoustic Spanish-influenced piece. The flamenco, I'm probably mispronouncing that wrong, but the traditional flamenco is very much on display here. The instruments, there's a fantastic trumpet solo here. Something about Final Fantasy VI just calls out for the trumpet, I guess. The way this just builds as you're climbing that mountain, it creates that feeling of ascension going up that hill. It's an exciting piece. This is La Montaña de los Caballos Jóvenes. I am so sorry for that pronunciation. By XPRTNovice from ocremix.org from the game Final Fantasy VI.
Uno, dos, tres, four.
that was La Montaña de los Caballos, Jóvenes, which I believe translates to The Mountain of Young Horses by XPRTNovice from OCRemix.org from the game Final Fantasy VI, and that's right, the Final Fantasy VI Balance and Ruin album. Go check out that album. So this is a very quiet piano piece. It's an old track from the year 2000. We're looking at a 20-year-old remix, but because it's a solo piano piece, it has aged wonderfully. It's aged as well as the game Final Fantasy VI. It's remixing the track Kids Run Through the City, which is a very lovely piece. It's one of those town pieces where it's just quiet and peaceful. It's a nice respite from the world of battling monsters every time you walk two steps down the street. It gets me a little wistful for a peaceful life, a peaceful time when all I could care about was how much Final Fantasy VI I could fit into my day. So this is Back to Town Arranged by MkVaff from OCRemix.org from the game Final Fantasy VI. That was Back to Town Arranged by MkVaff from OCRemix.org from the game Final Fantasy VI. You know, I called it a solo piano piece, but this is not. There's a lot of different instruments in there, the woodwinds and the flute. It's obviously very focused on the piano, but it's not just a solo piece. So I don't know what I'm talking about most of the times, but I hope my enthusiasm carries me through. That's what I'm hoping for. All right, this is just a stone cold classic. It's from 2013. It's from the Balance and Ruin album. This track is a wonderful and perfect example. A wonderful and perfect example. What was I saying about hyperbole here? This is just such a great example of how when remixing video game tracks, you can take them and turn them into a new genre, or a genre that they were so close to being in the first place. Maybe help them find their true selves. This is remixing the Shadow theme. Shadow being one of the coolest characters from Final Fantasy VI. I mean, you're playing that game and all of a sudden you have a ninja on your team. A couple of remixers here have come in, taken the Shadow theme, and turned it into the spaghetti Western genre, the music of Morricone. You're hearing Shadow's theme from Final Fantasy VI as if it was supposed to be in A Fistful of Dollars or The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. It's great. Jillian Aversa here on hand to add that spaghetti Western vocal work, and it's some of her most fun and exciting vocal work on this, and it's great. It absolutely nails the sound of that spaghetti Western. I'm done saying the phrase spaghetti Western now. So this is A Fistful of Nickels by Jeff Ball, Jillian Aversa, XPRTNovice, and Zircon from OCRemix.org from the game Final Fantasy VI. was A Fistful of Nickels by Jeff Ball, Jillian Aversa, XPRTNovice, and Zircon from ocremix.org, from the game Final Fantasy VI, from the album Balance and Ruin. That whistling kills me too. It's so fun to whistle too. I like to use that as a guide on how strong my whistle is for that day. Can I whistle along with that? Yeah, alright, I'm doing okay. Up next is a Cayenne theme. Taking a lot of Kung Fu influences here, remastering a lot of the sounds to make it sound like a worn out VHS tape. You have something that's very much in its own genre, but also still going for a big orchestral version of Cayenne's theme. There's a regality to it. There's a lo-fi element throughout. It really does kind of maintain a grindhouse feel with the static that goes throughout. But it also has an element of sadness, because Cayenne's story in that game is very sad. His life is not a happy tale for a while, and it has one of my favorite. He's involved in some of my favorite scenes in that game. I think this track maintains the themes of the original score, but also really delivers on the character himself. So this is Stone Drum by Radiowar, from the album Final Fantasy VI Balance and Ruin, from the game Final Fantasy VI. That was Stone Drum by Radiowar, from the album Final Fantasy VI Balance and Ruin, from the game Final Fantasy VI. Up next is a remix of the Mog theme, the Moogle, the first Moogle I ever encountered. Mog is a character that I always liked, just because, Moogles are just so adorable. Whenever I play a Final Fantasy, I'm always disappointed that a Moogle isn't in your party, isn't really part of the story, because it seems so important to me in FF6 that he was there. And I was surprised going forward in 7, 8, 9, and onwards that it wasn't a franchise standard. This track by Brandon Strader is almost a whimsical dubstep piece, goofy charm that the Moogles have, that Mog has, whose main battle attacks are from dancing. So this is Mostradamus by Brandon Strader from the album Final Fantasy VI Balance and Ruin, from the game Final Fantasy VI. That was Mostradamus by Brandon Strader from the album Balance and Ruin, from the game Final Fantasy VI. The track, the original source from Final Fantasy VI, the Another World of Beast by Nobuo Uematsu, is so eerie and so perfect on the Super Nintendo because of that sound design. It's a track that when you hear its original form, it's hard to imagine it being on another system, even one that has like a dedicated sound chip, because the sounds and the samples that are being used on the Super Nintendo just seem to fit so wonderfully with the atmosphere that Uematsu was going for there. It's telling this story of two people, very different creatures even, falling in love and taking chances because of love. Protricity has taken that source and made it so nasty. The piano is very foreboding. The parts where the piano is just repeating the same notes over and over again just set you on ease. And then that nasty guitar comes in. And it's an evil, nasty guitar with ill intent. It's just there to start a fight, really. This is Enchanted Esper by Protricity from ocremix.org from the game Final Fantasy VI. That was Enchanted Esper by Protricity from ocremix.org from the game Final Fantasy VI. All right, the next track is actually a bonus track from the Balance and Ruin album. The first 4 discs are all part of the story, all remixing tracks in order as they appear in Final Fantasy VI, and Disc 5 is a collection of bonus tracks of remixes from the songs that already got remixed but are different and unique, or maybe doing an experiment that didn't really fit with the rest of the album. Blind comes in and turns the Slam and Shuffle track into a house piece, and it is some spooky fun stuff. The town of Zozo with that rain always had such a strange feel to it. I mean, it's supposed to be the home to the criminals, but it always had that element of dirt and grit to it, and Blind hasn't lost any of that. He's just made it something that you can dance to. So this is Slam and Shuffle by Blind from the album Balance and Ruin from the game Final Fantasy VI. That was Slam Shufflin' by Blind from the album Balance and Ruin from the game Final Fantasy VI. Okay, and now it's time to play a track from the man himself, Kefka. The villain that all Final Fantasy villains are trying to replicate. Even Sephiroth has not been able to just be as joyful and scene-chewing as Kefka. Kefka, he is just pure chaos, and he's just doing it for the love of being evil. He does what he loves, and he's never worked a day in his life. He's a little bit more successful than some of the other Final Fantasy villains. He has such a crazy look. Everyone compares him to the Joker, and sure, that's true. I mean, there's even some Danny Elfman elements in this track we're about to play. What makes Kefka different from someone like the Joker? He just goes so much bigger. It's like if the Joker had Brainiac or Darkseid ambitions. Joker's just happy to be dealing with Batman and having fun with that. Kefka, one isn't enough. He wants the whole world. He wants the whole universe. He's got dreams. No one's getting in his way. This is a cinematic piece, a classical piece that goes through a few different styles. You kind of get a build of, like I said, a bit of Danny Elfman, but in the end, it also comes out to be a bit triumphant, a bit heroic, like Kefka's the hero. And of course, he's the hero of his own story, even though he knows what a villain he is. Man, I love Kefka. This is Ascension of a Madman by Steffan Andrews from the album Balance and Ruin from the game Final Fantasy VI. That was Ascension of a Madman by Steffan Andrews from ocremix.org from the game Final Fantasy VI from the album Balance and Ruin, the Final Fantasy VI tribute album. Definitely go listen to that album. I own the physical copy. It's one of the few physical copies I own, and it's one of my favorites. And that was the last track of our Final Fantasy VI special. I could have done 10 more Final Fantasy VI specials, and I still wouldn't have been happy. I've got a playlist on my iTunes that's purely Terra remixes, but there's just so many great tracks from it. It's just one of Uematsu's best pieces of works, one of the most solid, one of the most consistently great from start to finish soundtracks. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for listening to Radio 64 Video Game Music Remix Radio. I have been your host, Eric Mickles, also known online as duskvstweak. You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube under duskvstweak. Radio 64 is part of the Radio Meanwhile network. Visit radiomeanwhile.com for more information about this and other great podcasts. You can share your thoughts on this episode and request music by following the show on Facebook and Twitter at Radio64Pod. Please rate, subscribe, and share this show on Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.